Cool. Can everybody hear me from here if I talk like this?
Yeah.
Great. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Before I get into characterizing why this league gets significantly more investment, why we get more competitive games and greater entertainment, and there are multiple macroeconomic benefits from the spillover effect this has on tourism in various countries, as well as just investment in general, I'd like to characterize what we think this league likely looks like. I think this league likely looks like a new league where top-ranked teams from each national league in these small European countries then go into that league, i.e. maybe the top 24 teams at the absolute max. We think that the lower level teams probably come second tier and probably still exist but feed into that league. That is, they are excluded from that league because you probably can't have a 60, 70, 80 team league. That's probably the trade-off within this debate. Secondly, we think that this isn't about countries with very large audiences and status quo. The motion specifies very small European countries. We assume this means that there's a smaller market. This is obviously not about Spain or Italy, that are countries that may have relatively low GDP, but have very strong football teams, very large international audiences, and tons of branding power. This probably applies to the Benelux countries. This probably applies to ex-Yugoslav countries, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about why this league likely then develops relatively cheaply and quickly. I think the infrastructure to develop this league is already there and readily accessible for 3 reasons. Firstly, these teams already regularly play exhibition games against each other. They're used to travel, and there's path-dependent mechanisms, and they go on to that in a minute. Secondly, they already participate in things like UEFA Champions League at the highest level, so they already have a wide degree of integration and interaction. Thirdly, they already have similar laws and regulations governing sports, i.e. salary caps on players, streaming rights, and so on and so forth. This means we think it's probably fairly easy and cheap to harmonize to a large extent. Clarification, sure.
2 things. A, does the league have a common budget or only team-by-team budget? And secondly, is the team that represents the league in international such as FIFA selected only based on merit or based on some form of rotation to represent?
Common budget and merit. Moving on, let's talk about investment. Note that in the status quo, these leagues are not just underfunded, but they're often relatively small. That is to say, they have relatively small audiences. That is, streaming rights are very in demand in 1 or 2 countries. That is, streaming rights to games for Dinamo Zagreb and the league they play in are very in demand in Croatia, but in demand significantly less outside that because they have a large national audience but a smaller international one. Secondly, there are often fluctuations in funding, i.e. maybe this is not true in Croatia, where football is incredibly popular, but in some of the Benelux countries, the governments have relatively small GDP, state funding is fairly limited, and therefore it is often due to fluctuation, so it is regularly cut at the point at which governments come into power who don't see this entertainment as important and proximate. But thirdly, private investors tend to be localized and therefore smaller scope. Because there's less demand for watching these games internationally, large private investors feel they are not able to recoup the massive amounts of investment that they pour in the team. Therefore, they invest significantly less, and the investors that go in and sponsor these leagues tend to be smaller scale, i.e. national millionaires at the very, very absolute best, rather than international funders like large Saudi Arabian public investment funds and things like this. What happens at the point at which you harmonize these leagues and you make this international league? I think that firstly, there's a large shock factor, right? You've never seen these teams play against each other before, outside of exhibition games, outside the very top teams going up against each other in UEFA and things like this. This is likely to be a signal to investors that leads to more of them wanting to invest insofar as this gets lots of press coverage, lots of media attention, and there's likely to be a lot of attention generated by this. But secondly, you get more consistency in competitive games. Most investors know that in the status quo, you get maybe 4 or 5 throughout the season of a competitive game where the top team or 2 top teams go against the one other top team in the league significantly. Not even 10 to 20 competitive games. At the point at which there's significantly greater competition within the league, there's likely to be a perception that these leagues will want to be invested in to a greater extent. But thirdly, there are more ticket sales from fans internationally who want to travel to these games, meaning that people are paying more. This attracts investors insofar as they see greater ability to recoup their investment that otherwise would not exist. But fourthly, this creates more economies of scale, right? At the point at which you're able to get larger sponsorship deals. That is, if you're only the sponsor of the Finnish league, this is relatively small and fewer people care. When you pool a larger number of populations watching this from multiple countries, investors are far more likely to feel they can gain a significant return on their investment because streaming rights, things like ticket sales, become far more in demand from multiple different audiences. So you aggregate that together and you make the investment significantly larger. What does this mean? Firstly, it means you get a significantly better and larger amount of money within the league. What are the benefits of this? I think that firstly, the league gets more money to market the game. That is, they are able to attract more fans, they're able to invest more money in players, they're able to recoup that investment to a greater degree. Secondly, the teams have more money, right? At the point in which they are able to pay players higher salaries, they're able to offer benefits like better insurance, better medical care if these players get injured, more access to coaches to train them, more ability to develop lower second string and third string players in order to get them on the field to a significantly larger extent. But thirdly, you get more money going into things like player recruitment, i.e. scouting for talent, bringing up people from lower leagues and things like this. So you get more amount of that. But finally, you get more money that goes into developing infrastructure, i.e. stadiums, training centers, and so on. All of this has spillover benefits because smaller teams that exist outside the league can make use of these things as well and are likely to make use of these things at the point at which this infrastructure exists and is now readily available. The impact of all of this is 2 things. Firstly, I think the players are significantly better off. They have significantly more money and they're able to really utilize that to a significant extent. But secondly, it's a much more entertaining sport, right? More people are viewing this, more people watch that every day, more people travel to that. But it's not just to get a greater concentration in investment, right? So the investment is distributed more evenly. Note that in the status quo, top teams in leagues like Dynamo Zagreb attract significantly more investment, i.e. the top teams in each league have the most money, and the leagues distribute those funds to the teams at the top because the teams have the largest budgets. On our side, the sponsor sponsors the whole league. So every team that participates, in the same way that Heineken sponsors the entire championship league, make profit off of that, and it disaggregates throughout the team. Because this league is likely run in a democratic manner, i.e. distributing equal amounts of funding to each of those individuals, it's probably the case that these sponsorship deals are aggregated across the entire leagues. Insofar as these clubs are private entities and a sponsor has to pay for all of them, and these larger TV audiences translate into that, means that not only gets more investment, but they get greater distribution of investment. It means that the teams within the league are, even if some of them are smaller and not as successful, are all better off in general. So we harmonize and equalize competition to a greater extent. Second claim, entertainment in the sport. I think this is incredibly important insofar as the sport becoming more entertaining is not only a prerequisite to generating more of that kind of investment, but also it has multiple spillover effects in terms of identity, in terms of players enjoying these kinds of things to an extent. Firstly, you now have tons of teams of more equal quality going up against one another more regularly. I think this is good for fans. When you go to the pub, you get other people cheering on, you get more discourse around the sport, and more people are likely to opt into watching it. But secondly, more competitive games mean more people are likely to tune in more regularly, which is an additional mechanism to generate more of the investment. But more people see these games that are better and they're more regularly streamed, right? So fans derive more identitarian benefits from that. They enjoy seeing that to a greater extent. Before I explain the wider macroeconomic benefits, closing.
Originally, you're dividing the same number of friends over the same number of teams. Where is all the extra views and extra money coming from?
Yeah, because before, the audiences are localized. Now they travel to multiple countries, and now they get greater degrees of investment because the league is seen as more competitive. I already recognize this. Moving on. Why do we get wider macroeconomic benefits? I think this is the most important impact in the debate as well, because insofar as this has spillover effects that translate beyond the amount of sports fans, sports teams, and so on and so forth, but has multiple effects on individuals by attracting more investment into these countries in general. I think we have a multiple spillover effects that is a much larger in scope of benefit. I think firstly, you get more tourism, right? Insofar as more fans are likely to travel to different countries more regularly because they're going to see these things, and note that these countries are often near each other, so they are readily accessible. It's not like they're not going to travel. You get significantly more investment in those countries at the point at which there's a broader tax base. Now governments tax that, redistribute that, and put that to things like welfare and so on and so forth. This has obvious benefits for people who access those kinds of things. We're now able to access hospitals at cheaper rates, are now able to access healthcare at cheaper rates, who pay less in taxes to welfare at the point at which it becomes more readily accessible. But secondly, more people visit, right? Insofar as that's important, that also gets taxed, that also goes into government budgets and things like this. But finally, there are spillover effects into lower level leagues, right? Insofar as now these lower level leagues get significantly more investment as well because they get spillover effects from secondary and tertiary levels of investment. Those leagues now get better players as well. Those leagues now get more money as well because it spills over from internally from that league to a great extent. Opening opposition is when trying to tell you this league is undemocratic. Exclude smaller teams. Those smaller teams already in status quo are underfunded, have less fans, and things like this. We give those teams an ability to gain spillover fans while simultaneously benefiting the teams at the top and getting significantly greater degrees of investment. Incredibly proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for that speech, and I invite the leader of the opposition to begin the opposition bench.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. In a world where sport to people is like religion, to them it's part of their identity and something that they fight for and is often a source of tension. In a world where many of these regions that we are going to have leads from have a history of war, it is interesting to us that Prime Minister chose to make the entirety of his speech on where do we get more money for sports. I'll have 2 points in my speech. Firstly, on tensions between fan bases and nations. Secondly, on where do we get better sport for fans. Before that, one piece of extensive rebuttal, most of it will be integrated in my second point, but I just want to point out, even if we were to accept the metric that the quality of sports is more important, which we do not, even then, money in terms of how much we get it is not still proving that the sport gets better. Money is a means to an end. At this point, the entirety of the Prime Minister's speech is just showing more money might get to the league without showing why it would actually make the sport more high quality, more enjoyable, fans actually enjoying it more, having better access, feeling better about what they have. Sport is only good insofar as the people who watch it enjoy it, and insofar as it gives people a sense of meaning and something to identify with. If we just pour money on it and never connect it to
or something that fans can identify with. I don't care. Let's go to the point. Firstly, on tensions. And I'll be extremely comparative because we are aware that tensions exist on both sides. I expect government to be comparative as well when they engage us. Why do we think under our side there is significantly smaller chance on tensions than after the motion? And note, tensions are quite extremely important for two crucial reasons. Firstly, it's enough for a massive fight to happen once for the chances of escalation. If there's a massive fan fight between fans of two teams, then the next time, knowing it happened first and it got violent, they might bring a knife with them. This has the potential to get worse and worse. And secondly, because we know that a lot of tensions and warfare between people is heavily based on symbolism and ethos. Yes, it might sound small like sport, but keep in mind that literally right now, Serbian minority in Kosovo are fighting and shooting over number plates on cars because they are being forced to take off the plates of Serbia. Everything is about symbolism. Okay, what do we think is actually going to be what people see in those leagues? A, we think that when when the leagues compete internally to choose who represents the region in the bigger international competitions like FIFA, etc., you are going to have a lot of infights between these teams. We are aware today there are already games between the Croat team and the Serbian team and so on. We think, however, that the difference is A, today the teams inside nations, because leagues are national, have more local fights between them, meaning that when they win, they don't show the Croat flag or the Serbian flag, but rather their team flag, because they don't identify as winning for the nation. They are winning among many teams in the nation as part of the league, whereas under their side of the motion, the team that wins is likely to represent itself as representing its country. Just like when I compete in debating in Israel, I compete as Tel Aviv. If I'm going to make final here, I would put an Israeli flag. When we compete in a league that represents a region, this is something that's much more likely to happen and get more of a national front. Secondly, it also means that today there is equality between how much I compete against people from a different region and how many teams I compete for a different country within my own region when I actually have national teams. Whereas in this league there is more of a place and an incentive for internal fights that will get more viewership as a result. Thirdly, we think that what is going to also happen is when someone loses, there's going to be much more tendency to blame them. Imagine that the team that is chosen to represent the regional league is going to lose on an international. How easy it is for a team of a different country to say, if only our team, if only the team from our nation would have represented us, it wouldn't have happened. There's much more chance for actually scapegoating this. Thirdly, we think that it means that some teams will get rarely represented. Note our clarification to Prime Minister. The selection is going to be purely merit-based, no rotation whatsoever. This means that teams that have more backing from their government, more budget, teams that just have more history or better players, I don't care what reason is going to make them more successful, are going to be more dominant. And this means that some teams will rarely ever get to represent their countries in international competitions outside of their own league. And this is when you develop resentment towards the other nation that you feel pushes you outside, that you feel doesn't let you a chance to actually represent your country. Fourthly, it means that I have much more expectations from them to represent me as well. Today, if an Albanian player shows the Albanian symbol after winning a game, then I say, you know what, fuck it, it annoys me if I'm not Albanian. But tomorrow, if I know he's part of my league and meant to represent me internationally, I'm upset because he's meant to represent all of us equally, and this feels like I'm being mistreated. This is also likely to be used symbolically in many local conflicts that are going to be used to show how people don't care about us. Just like currently in Bosnia, the Croat minority feel unrepresented because they have a president that doesn't actually represent the Croats because he was elected by Bosniaks. Similarly, I can use the example of, look, even in the game, they don't actually represent us, they just take our budgets for it. Before I move to the second point, closing extension.
Look, everything you say also applies within the internal leagues right now. Nations aren't falling apart over this.
No, literally, I just did a comparative analysis. Today, I don't expect the other side to represent me. I expect them to represent only their own country. Today, there's more internal fights to my own nation as opposed to between national teams. Today, there's no difference between competing against a different team from any other country than within my own region. All of the comparisons in the analysis don't strawman the case. Cool. Let's talk about why we have better sports as well. Firstly, we think that part of it isn't just money, but accessibility as well. When my national team competes in my own country, in my own city, etc., it means that the fans can see it more. When a lot of the games have to rotate between countries now, because it is an international thing of the region, it means that many fans have significantly less access to the games and enjoying significantly less. Secondly, it's much harder to get state funding, because as Prime Minister conceded in our clarification, there is going to be a mutual funding for the league, meaning that it's much harder to justify taking taxpayers' money to pay for something that might help for a different team, not of my own nation. So we're going to also lose on that. Thirdly, we think funding isn't likely to be democratic, something that Matt only asserted, by the way. A, because it's really easy to excuse being undemocratic. Exactly when everything is merit-based, I can just say, well, if the Bosniak team is always much worse because they are much poorer or something like this, I do not need to give them as much funding because we think that it is meritocratic to just give more to the more successful team. And this is an easy way to excuse tensions like racism, nationalism, etc. Lastly, we think that we just have more representation for my nation on our side because all nations get to compete in the international competitions. For all those reasons, as well.
Sorry. For POIs, I'll let you know when I'm ready. Don't verbally interrupt. Sorry, I'm just making sure my phone doesn't turn off. Great. 3, 2, 1. The reason the PM decided to focus only on investment is because he has a partner that can cover the love of the game that requires prettier words that he's incapable of speaking. Let's make sure we take out the O in this round. I want to really make it clear why national tensions and violence is completely out of this debate, and gut check this. One, I think it's largely symmetric when they already occasionally play against each other in the Champions League often. That is to say when Red Star Belgrade and Dinamo Zagreb are in the same group stage, for example. But even if you don't buy that, note that minority players playing in other countries' teams also incite the same kind of violence. That is to say when Red Star Belgrade has a player that is Croatian or Albanian, and then they end up shitting on him in the stadium, and then the Muslim fans get mad when they play against other teams. But even if you don't buy none of that, and this is literally going to take them out, there are the same fucking fights when the national teams compete for Euros qualification or World Cup qualification against each other anyway. There's already that violence. But I'll be charitable to them. I think we can flip them. Note that there's no touching at all on Matt's investment mechanisms. Think about what happened when you get more investment. You have substantially more money for things like security, or for example, to use national police forces to make sure that people who have a history of, for example, posting incendiary comments online aren't allowed at the games, for example. Or secondarily, I think we're logically prior because note that a lot of tensions exist due to disparities in funding and lack of funding, that we are far better able to equalize and distribute, which will become a bit more clear when I get to the comparative and engagement. But thirdly, note, I think I'm going to run the very generic contact theory argument, but it's going to make sense when I run it. I think that a lot of the tension happens because it's something new. That is to say, you don't always play against them. When it is something that is largely consistent, it is something that is a lot less fresh, that incites a lot of the tensions and violence. But even if you don't buy any of that, I think the tensions are less likely to materialize because now that's going to cost you points to get into the regional league. So now you can do it a lot more like domestically because you're in the same domestic league, right? Like if you're like Red Star Belgrade, you're already winning the Serbian league by like 15 or 20 points. But now there's a substantial cost for your fans to otherwise like speak out or to create a lot of that tension at the stadium or to create a lot of that violence because there are higher stakes. There's something you can otherwise lose that does not exist in the same national league because there's a lot more competitiveness. Now, I want to be very clear. Why do we get substantially more investment and views? Note there was no actual like rebuttal to it at all. So if the DLO rebuts it, it's very hard for me to rebut that rebuttal. But I want to make it very clear. One, the shock factor that exists with a new new league and the excitement that is generated. That is, say it's something fresh, the media talks about it a lot, people want to see what this new league is about. Secondarily, note cross-subsidization of views and travel. That is to say, if you are from Finland, you now watch Swedish teams when they play against Finnish teams that otherwise would not have happened. That is more dollars that is generated for sponsorship and viewership of teams because the audience by definition has to be larger. But I think also it operates at the level of sponsors and investors, because now the comparatives, there's a far larger audience for you to tap into. You don't want to if you're a beer company, you don't want to sponsor the Finnish league by itself because it's a very small population. But now you know that Swedish teams or Swedish populations will be watching that team as well insofar as their teams compete against them. On entertainment of the sport, why does it become more entertaining? I want to make it very clear. One, the best teams or better teams compete against each other more consistently. So even if in the national leagues they still compete against each other, it's usually 3 or 4 teams that are quite homogenized at the top. They don't play against each other week in, week out. So even if they try to say, we still get competitiveness, it's a question of degree that we get more of. Secondarily, you get substantially more money for youth development and scouting. That is to say, you find the diamonds in the rough, right? Like the people like Mbappe, who you otherwise couldn't sponsor if you were a lower level team because you just didn't have the money, right? The reason why this happens is because now you have substantially more disposable income to do so. You don't have to spend as much money on like marketing, for example. You can afford to pay like the tuition of a new player that could otherwise be the next star that you never thought of. But thirdly, things like, for example, more money for sports physiologists to let you run faster during the games and discover new ways to compete at the highest level for more years, so you don't have to retire at like age 30, but you can do so at age 35. Why is this critical and should be the primary way? The majority of people who watch sports largely do it as a valuable escape mechanism. They can't just watch Netflix, etc. because they grew up watching football and the love for it. They developed a particular preference that they can't just automatically switch to watching something else. But you might say, Ahmed, why can't they just watch the Champions League that still exists for entertainment on either side? One, they have an attachment to their countries and the region and watching football that is close to home. And secondarily, they want to view it in person, and flying to a different country to watch the Champions League match is expensive. Now, I want to take out the opposition framing. The identity of teams and small clubs that are very valuable on their side. Note, their own framing destroys them, because if they have consistency loyalty bases where they support their teams when they are relegated or not, the identity, benefits, or loyalty of the team is not contingent on results or you going to a lower league, because they've supported you through the rough, through the thick and the thin, so they will still support you if you're on the thin side, on our side. But also note that the identity benefits of the club operate outside of results. That is, say, it's going to the game with your family, irrespective of the score that happens or how many people watch that game, chanting in the stadium with friends, getting drunk on the bus there. Example, like fucking Millwall sucks, but all of their fans have a great time when they watch them. What this essentially means is that now you have substantially more investment that trickles down for people to get that identity benefits, even if they are losing every match or they're not playing in the large league. Now, I want to be very clear why small teams largely won't get as fucked as they talk about on their side. One note, it's largely symmetric on either side. Insofar as small teams are comparatively disadvantaged historically, they largely fluctuate in and out of relegation in the league anyway, so they're never consistently within the top league to begin with. But secondarily, I want to flip this. I think now when the big teams leave the smaller league, some of them may be relegated, which now means the 5th best team in the league can now enter the new regional league the next year. That is to say, if Dinamo Zagreb was hogging the entire Croatian league and now they get to the regional super league, the 5th best team now becomes the 1st best team within the Croatian league, then gets a chance at the new regional super league where they could otherwise never get the top chance within the domestic league. But I want to be very clear why the 2nd division still gets watched, but I would like to take a back half from POI from back half. No POIs? Note I tried to engage. Why does the 2nd division, now the National League, still get watched? One, it's a large pipeline into the new big league. That is to say, the national audience want to see, for example, this is like the teams that could be in the league next year. But secondarily, national audience still exists and have attachment to watching their own national leagues. But thirdly, I think they get watched substantially more because now the National League has a substantially higher stake to it. Yes, some of those teams may now go to the Champions League on either side, but the difference now is now you're getting to go to an additional regional super league. So if you're Dinamo Zagreb and you're ahead by like 15 points in the league, it doesn't fucking matter like the next few games because you know you're going to win. But now it is contingent to actually get promoted into the new league. But now they might say, you get less representation in international leagues like the UEFA Champions League. Note this largely doesn't happen insofar as the UEFA Champions League and like supranational leagues operate independently of these new regional leagues. So you will still get large international like attention, etc. Insofar as the team that like is the top team in the new regional super league still gets into the UEFA Champions League and promoted. But even if you don't buy that, I think the investment largely has to trickle down insofar as larger sponsors have to sponsor the whole league and the second divisions below them as well. Because you can't just sponsor individual games. You have to sponsor the institution, which means it has to be distributed amongst the teams that go lower. Never been prouder to win from, we're also going to destroy the Balkans in the football game tonight.
Can I actually move this?
Oh, yeah.
Jonathan, I'm shutting my microphone. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. I'll win this debate very clearly in 2 ways. We're going to show you why we cause more violence, and I want Ahmed to note something a second, that if one more person gets hurt, if one more person has trauma, if one more person has physical pain, I wonder if he would be that dismissive about it if that person was him. So that is the most important impact in this debate, regardless if it already happens to some extent on our side too. The second thing is we're going to talk about the fans and the sport and the quality of the game, and explain why, even if that's the metric you want to go with, we still win that as well. Let's talk about incitement to violence, and I really want to explain a second why this is the most important thing in this debate. A, it's irreversible. Physical pain, physical scars, if you are now hurt in your leg and every time you get up in the morning it pains you physically, that is an irreversible harm that you can't get, and there are no alternatives to it. I can't get a new foot. I can't to some extent watch different leagues. Maybe it won't be the exact same, but it is more possible than getting a new foot if I have hurt it. Second, the psychological impacts are incredibly long-term. If I remember being in a crowd and being threatened and being hurt and someone waving a knife at me, every time I have to go somewhere with a crowd, every time I have to be in public, every time I have to go in my day-to-day to malls or in the street or anything, I find that incredibly difficult. I think that is a more important thing to people even than sports, so if we avoid that for even 3, 4, 10, 100 people, we win this debate. But also, notice the logical priority, right? When there's violence at games, it's not fun. I can't go to a game if I'm scared that if I go, I'm going to be trampled by a crowd. I can't go to a game that I'm scared that if I leave, I'm going to be waved a knife at. I can't bring my children to a game if I think that they might be in danger. I can't go. It also harms my ability to identify and feel pride. We think it's unlikely to be the majority. It's probably the minority of people doing this, but for the majority who want to go, they are against this violence, and it harms their ability to identify with the team, which is their metric in this debate. We also think that it's enough that this would happen once to create that fear, enough that this would happen once to create that shame and make it incredibly difficult for people to continue identifying. We also think that budgets and broadcast rights and things like that are dependent on this, because if they are scared that what they're going to do causes violence, if they're scared that they are contributing to this, if investors think that they might be contributing to a league that causes violence, they're going to be not inclined to do so because they don't want to harm their reputation. And guess what? Investors have better leagues to invest in than the Yugoslavian leagues or the Scandinavian league. Why do we actually get more violence? OJ claims symmetric. Hadar gave 4 comparative reasons on why it's likely to happen more. Notice that even if it just happens more and not exclusively, that is still an impact that is not symmetric. Also, here is some more. It happens more frequently because they play each other more often against each other now that teams have to see teams from different countries than when they play against each other in the same league in the same country. We think that and for that reason, we just think it happens more. But then they say, money solves this. Why does money not solve this? We just think that we are better able to handle things when they happen internally, no matter how much money I have. Why? Because all of the people who are involved in it are citizens of my country. This means that I have the ability to process them. I have the ability to understand the bureaucracy, and I'm not at risk of creating a diplomatic incident if I try to take steps against them. It means I can better prepare for things. I know where the game is going to happen. It's internally. I decide which stadium it's in. I choose the place where it might be most safe. I can make sure that I put police in the right places. I cannot depend on other countries, especially since if something happens in my country, the other country has an incentive to blame me, to say it was my fault. They're never going to let this happen, and it won't happen, and they won't let me put sanctions, and they won't let me make demands for what we do in the future, and they're definitely not going to let me not allow their fans to come to the game, which is something I can do on my side of the house. So even if it's easier to enforce, this has nothing to do with money. And lastly, contact theory. Okay, if contact theory was a thing, I would not be scared to walk around in Jerusalem Jerusalem and Bosnia and Herzegovina would be like fine today. But that's not a thing. Why? Because contact theory is dependent on positive interaction, when the assumption is if you see someone on a day-to-day basis in a bus, you like interact with them and it's fine. Notice that the context of these things is actively bad, actively competitive, actively one against another, which means that contact theory doesn't happen in this case. But even if they want to argue that, it's more likely to work for people who are citizens of the same country, therefore like it might have been a thing, as opposed to citizens of different countries who are now playing each other, which means that actually flips. That means we've proven significantly more violence, and even if it's not significantly for more people, it's just more important in sports. Back half.
Hooligans actively consent to violence are often completely separate from casual viewers.
No, it's not true, because they go outside in the parking lot after the game where everyone has to go to their cars and everything, and they're not separate, and people are trampled, and people are running against each other, and people are caught in it. And even if what you're saying is true, my perception of bringing my children to a game and being able to applaud and being able to be there, and my ability to identify with the team I think is violent, is something that doesn't change, and it doesn't matter if they're separate, the fear is still there. We just don't think it's that easy to control violence and incitement once it happens. That means we've shown you the biggest possible impact in this debate, because people care more about their physical well-being, care more about their life, care more about their ability to get meaning from other things and not be in pain and fear and trauma, and for that reason we win this debate. But even if, let's talk about fans a second, right? Why are fans the most important thing in sports? Look, logical priority, okay? A, this is what gives sports meaning. I am the champion of jumping on one foot in the morning. I swear to God, I can do it like 1,000 times a minute. No one cares, which means that achievement means nothing. The only thing that gives quality its meaning, the only thing that gives entertainment its meaning, the only thing that gives this thing its meaning is if people actually care. Once I've shown you that this harms fans' ability to identify, harms fans' ability to care, harms fans' accessibility, that means that even if they get all of their funding and all of their quality and all of their entertainment, they lose this debate because it carries less meaning for other people. But second, it leads to perpetuation of the sport. If people don't identify, if people are uninterested, if people are scared to go to the games, the ability to continue to get good players, the ability to continue to get good funding is harmed. That means that even if they do it at the beginning, it's not something that's perpetuated and happens often. And lastly, these people, fans, are most dependent on the sport. Players switch teams all the time, go to different countries, can do other things. Players and fans that identify with the team are the only ones that are dependent on their team for those things. Why do we think fans have less access? A, distance. They say tourism. I say I can't afford tourism. I can't go see my team play when they play outside of the country. Time. I can't take time off work. Identity. And notice that their league comes at the expense and not spillover, which they didn't analyze other than saying spillover, because it's an incentive to give funding only to that league and prioritize them with infrastructure so spillover doesn't happen. We've proven to you things. Please oppose.
I thank the gentleman of the opposition for that speech, and I'm the member of the government, so it wasn't have a debate.
Sorry, I'll also get rid of this. Three things in the speech. First, I will fill in the missing links in opening government on competitiveness, but I don't think that's important. I think what is really important in this debate is looking at why fans go to football, why they're going to keep watching, and why whatever tensions already exist on both sides of the house. What you have on our side of the house is you give them a healthy outlet for conflict. I think they're going to take them. So to the extent that you buy everything opening opposition is telling you about one more person being hurt should matter more than anything else in the debate, notice they don't prove one more person being hurt on the stadium is the only thing that matters. What we are telling you is that there are going to be a lot more people that are going to get less hurt outside of stadiums on our side of the house. That is going to matter a lot more than anything you hear on opening opposition. And then I will also look at fans and enjoyment. But first, I think there is an assumption that both opening teams share, and that is that more money necessarily makes you a better team. I know that money and funding is a prerequisite for you to be competitive, but it's not a sufficient condition, because if that was the case, then all of the billionaire, Arabian billionaires who own football teams would have the best football clubs in the world because they pump insane amounts of money in it and they are not accountable to shareholders and stuff. But you see, that's simply not the case. You see that yes, money helps, but only up to a certain point. From a certain point onward, what actually matters is the amount of practice you get. What actually matters is the talent pool you draw from that gets larger and outside of the house. But it also matters the way that teams play together, the way that teams interact with each other. So opening government relies on the assumption that people will keep watching because, people always watch whatever is more competitive. I think what is also crucial to note here is that an additional reason why they're going to watch these leagues above the national leagues is because of the national pride that OO is so concerned about, right? Because you want your team to compete at the highest level. You don't just want them to win in a vacuum in whatever is the smallest thing, just so that they say they won something, but you actually want to see them compete against the best teams because you have faith in them and because you believe in them. And even if when they lose, you still think your team has what it takes and you still want them to keep competing in that league because you're confident they're going to end up winning that league, right? But also all the attention and all of the media will go for that. All the players that you rooted for in your national league are going to be there. And that is the reason why you access all of the investment and all of the money that opening government wants you to care about. Right? But I think what is also important is looking at how it becomes more competitive is, yes, through acquiring the best players, right? And notice that the way you do that is by acquiring players from the whole region. So what that means is that now the team that you root for, because it technically represents your country within your regional league, is not going to be a team that is made up of people from your country because it's limited to the people in your country, but it's necessarily going to contain also people who represent other countries, because whatever is the top football team in your country will have enough money to acquire at least some players, even if not as many players as the even better funded team of another country. So what that means is that now the Croatian team that all Croatians will end up rooting for will also have Bosniaks on them that are contributing to their success, and will also have Serbian players on them. What that means is two things. One, little kids who grow up watching football see their heroes as whoever is best. Notice that you only acquire the best players. So whatever minorities are represented are going to be at the top of their field. They're going to be awesome. They're going to be the people you put posters of on your wall. They're going to be the people you buy t-shirts of. They're going to be the people who are your heroes and who you root for, right? So what that means is that Hadar doesn't get my POI. When I point out this is symmetric, there are already tensions within the country when teams within the country compete. Ahmed also picks up on my POI and develops it in his speech, right? Sorry, I POI'd it before you did that. The thing is that when your country does get represented in UEFA, you still root for it, even though they beat your own team, because they are still yours, right? So what happens is that is now going to transfer to this league, right? Yes, you might hate the shit out of the team that represents Serbia, but if that is the team that represents your whole region, you still root for them because they're still your team. That is something that would never happen without the existence of these regional leagues, and that is the most important impact in this debate. Why is this the case? Because if you care about tension and about people escalating, notice that yes, hooligans exist, but those are likely people that would find a reason to fight over anything, right? They fight for their team when they loses, they fight for their team when they wins. If they move cities, they will join a new hooligan group and they will fight for that. Marina explains to you that those are not the people that are going to have fights on stadiums because the leagues aren't stupid. The leagues realize that if it's a safety hazard, then people will no longer come to their games and people will disengage. They don't want their fans to be in danger, right? That is why you see that they can ban weapons. They have checks at the doors of every stadium. They even don't let you bring in metal bottles, but just plastic bottles and Tetra Packs so that you can't injure anyone, right? They sell less alcohols and things like that. But players themselves speak out, right? They have photo ops hugging players from other teams. They have videos of them training together to send a message that the league as a whole is still a league, right? Because even if the fans hate each other because they think their teams compete with each other, notice one, that hate only lasts as long as that team competes with yours. It magically disappears when the other team is the one representing you. We already see that happening with UEFA, and we already see that happening when players from many different teams get merged together in the national team for Euros and whatever, you still root for the national team even if it has a player from another team than yours, right? What that also means is that they are now going to presumably have the same mechanisms. I will take closing.
We think smaller teams get killed in your comparative, and we want to support them because they're the most important to the fans.
Look, they don't get. How would they get killed, right? You get more competitiveness. Like if you see at the way the Balkan debate circuit has developed, if Tin and Lovro were so fucking good, that didn't mean everyone else got killed. That meant everyone else got better too, because they got to compete against them every week and didn't only get access to the top teams when they went to a tournament every fifth weekend or whenever they could afford it. That just doesn't make any sense. If you have more people from a larger pool that are better, they get to play against each other more often and don't just, kick all the worst teams in their country. They all get better, right? But also the league as a whole works together and wants the whole league to prosper, even if the teams technically compete against each other, because the league cannot work with only one team or something like that, right? So all of the problems that OO finds in 15 minutes, surely the leagues are going to be aware of that and they are going to make sure that doesn't happen, right? What also happens is not only do you not get the violence that OO is so afraid of, you also don't get more people have an inclination to violence, but also most football fans aren't hooligans. They're just people with boring jobs and annoying wives who 4 hours a day on Saturday get to have fun with their friends. They're going to want to keep doing that. Now they're going to be rooting for minorities that otherwise they might hate and otherwise might blame for their problems in the process. I think that is a much better outlet for conflict if you just root for your team beating the Serbians. I'm very proud to be on that.
I thank the member of Robert for that speech, and I invite the member of the opposition to open the case of the opposition.
Cool? All right. In closing opposition, we are also going to talk about money, but we're going to protect the people and the players who need that money the most, right? What we're going to show you, directly engagement with both government teams, is that we are actually killing those non-24 teams that are not going to enter within that league, that are going to stay domestically, and those leagues are de facto going to die, not getting enough money, right? Why is this more important than the teams that they talk about? Simply, it's more people, right? Because status quo, we have 30 teams in 5 countries that play in their domestic leagues, and they want to transform 24 teams out of all of these 5 countries collectively to one single league, right? Leaving all of the other ones without any plausible income, right? Secondly, these teams, like they concede, already get money, which means because of sponsors, the best teams in each country, which means that the marginal utility of that money is relatively small because they don't need much more. But thirdly, the global goal, right, of this debate and the global good is that we need sport for stable income. These coaches, players, TV staff, advisors, assistant coaches, etc., all depend strictly on the income that they get from revenue by playing against other teams in order to pay their rent, in order to pay for their food. Notice a lot of these smaller teams, like they already say, that are that don't get much resources, already are struggling. They already need to pay to get income from other ways. They are already struggling financially. They already don't really have a good life. The only thing that they cling on is the fact that they can get enough money to keep going with that small team within that domestic league, right? Why does this then is significantly harmed on their side? Directly dealing with OJ on like, oh, this is symmetric, right? Firstly, spillover falls on our side of the house. Notice they never actually explain spillover and never actually analyze it, but notice how it actually falls, right? Because we have now less teams that are the big players within the domestic leagues, with the small teams strongly depend on the big teams that are going to move out of the league. Why is this the case? Because, like they already say, they have have less fans, which means that they depend on people and fans from from the big teams and from the strong teams to come and actually watch their games, right? This is very, very important, because here is the spillover that actually happens. When you have a big team that's playing against a very weak team, then the weak team still gets a lot of money because they're playing within their hometown. When you have a weak team that plays against another weak team, because all of the big players and all of the big teams and strong teams are not in the league, then there's no actual incentive for fans to come and watch this and watch these things, right? Because also they have much less fans, so there's much less revenue. The second thing that I want to say here is deal with these like assertions that come out of OG and OO. OG says, oh, fans will travel, so it's a lot of money. OO says, oh, fans won't travel. Let's understand why this won't actually happen. Firstly, you need a lot of money to travel outside of your country, because you need to pay for accommodation and you need to pay for the travel, if it's fuel, if it's train tickets, etc. But secondly, you need expectation that what you're traveling for is going to be worth it, right? So even if the big teams from every team, or the good teams, are getting to the big league, there's still going to be like a hierarchy, right? There's still going to be those 1-2 teams that are going to be very, very strong and are going to win. So you're going to say, well, I'm not willing to travel outside of my country to try and deal with all of the tiringness, and also have a very high chance of me just being very extremely upset and regretting me even going there in the first place. Notice, this also responds to the streaming point by OG, because OG says, oh, we'll get revenue from streaming because we have more fans. Firstly, I don't understand why you have more fans, because if you just collectivize all of the fans from 5 countries that watch this and now they're one big audience, it's still the same, just one second, it's still the same amount of people. But secondly, even if they get more revenue from streaming, notice, we don't really give a shit about this, because the revenue from streaming is so small compared to the revenues in tickets and stadiums, because you have to pay for the tickets that cost a lot of money, and the streaming is a lot of the times free, because you also get spillover effects on our side when you buy food and when you buy other things around the stadium, etc. So the revenue for these smaller teams and the weaker players is significantly smaller, right? Then they say it's more entertaining because there's more competition. I'm unclear on the extent of this within the big leagues, but notice here we specifically respond to this because we explain that there's actually not going to be any entertainment value watching the domestic leagues that are left, because all of the fans, because they're not going to watch all of the games in the world, are going to just move out and only watch that one unified league. This is crucial, right? The last thing they say here is, oh, we flip this because now the smaller teams becomes the best team. Yeah, but it doesn't matter if they lose all of the ads and banners that they put in the stadium, because it's not profitable to actually go in and do these things, because you now move all of your money and sponsorships inside of the big teams. Yes, before I continue, yes.
We preempted this. The second division gets watched more because it's now a massive pipeline to the big leagues. National audience still scared, even if it wasn't because of the identity stuff, and it gets watched more because we think of now more high stakes because of promotion to an international league. Even by none of that, they spend less money on training camps and so on and other resources, because they take advantage of expenditures by the big league.
Okay, firstly, they don't take expenditures from the big league because they are separated. The only thing you said on this is, oh, they can use the same stadiums. Like, I don't know why is that such a significant thing. But secondly, to respond to the... You gave me 2 POIs, Kira will respond to the first one. Okay, I just want to continue my puzzle, sorry. Okay, the last thing I want to say here is about scouting and contact theory, right? Notice, here as well, we are actively taking players from this. I think this also responds to the first part of the POI, right? Because you are now also getting more teams and more organizations coming from outside of your country, where previously, comparatively, it was domestically, to actually scout and steal players from your country to actually go ahead and play for other teams. This is very bad. CG agrees on this, but right, if there's that, now it just gives them more fuel and hatred towards them, saying, oh, not only we hate them, but we actually give them more, they actually give them more fuel to this hate, because now these ethnic tensions could come ahead and say, oh, well, they're also stealing our best players and using them to beat our same teams. Like, I see this is just much more likely. But secondly, why are these players are going to be the one getting the credit for when the team wins, and why will they not be receiving a lot of backlash when their team loses? And here's also where we deal with OG's contact theory, because OO says, yes, you need positive interactions. Even if there's positive interactions, you need to have willingness to accept these positive interactions, and you need to be accepting to actually make any meaningful use of them. We say this is untrue because people already have pre-existing bias against these minority players, which means that it's much harder to convince them to flip their opinion rather than just fuel an opinion that they already have much more. This also deals with a significant chunk of what we got from closing government on you know, more unity, etc. So we say these people and these players have much worse lives, both from the fans and with their income. Very proud to oppose.
I thank the member of the opposition for his speech, and I invite the government to conclude the government manager's help.
Ready? 3, 2, 1. First some responses to CEO, then a lot of weighing and rebuttal to OO. So first of all, small teams are only worth maintaining if they provide value. So if not everyone can be a pro player, it's unclear why that is more important than fans' enjoyment. You might hate capitalism, but you need to analyze why that is wrong. Not that the response to us is, oh, it's expensive and thus you don't have actually the interactions and things like that. No, to you, 1, now actually these teams also come to you. They play at your city, they play at another city, etc. 2, you can watch in bars. It's unclear why you need to go always to the game to actually have that enjoyed. 3rd, fan clubs organize buses that make it significantly cheaper to go there, etc. 4thly, you also, like, this is symmetric to some extent because it is fucking more expensive and complicated to go from Zagreb to Dubrovnik than it is to go from Zagreb to Ljubljana. So it's unclear why this is always comparative on their side of the house, but note also that people can prioritize what they spend their money on. And if they want to spend their money on football and this is what they care about most, this is completely legitimate. So we think that is actually worth it. Then on some rebuilding on why fans will buy in. I think that this is extremely important, and this is where Miri's analysis comes in, and this is why OG can't win the debate, because they don't actually explain why it becomes more competitive, because if money would solve everything, then we would have like those clubs be the most important and the best. I think it's important that Miri's analysis explains to you why representation leads to a cathartic experience for the people who watch it. First of all, you need to see someone as a representative in order to access this cathartic experience and the identification. They never explain why you actually see this league as representative. So there's a few things that can happen. 1, your team from your city loses to another city and therefore you're angry. This means you're just more hyped for the next game. You want to see the next game. You're definitely going to buy the ticket. This is when you get more money because you rally up your friends. You're like, oh my God, we're going to go to their city. Or if it's in your hometown, you're like, come on, all friends, we need to get together to actually see this. Secondly, on a global scene, after Belgrade Worlds, the most comments in the Balkan group was, imagine if ex-Yugoslavia wasn't separated, what we would do to the Yanks. This is the exact same sentiment, because as much as you hate, for example, a Croat as a Serb, you hate the Americans even more. So this is why people will have this cathartic experience when they see, for example, but this is only if Red Star Belgrade actually beat all the other teams in a legitimate league that weighs these teams against each other. Otherwise, you cannot accept this representation and this identification with it. This is where this becomes comparative. Note also on contact theory, I think if we explain why violence will probably not happen, 2, why you access this identification, I think, and 3, players are already mixed to some extent because you want the best players. They just get more mixed because you have more abilities to scout them, more abilities to negotiate with them, etc. More money to actually like pay them. Then some rebuttal. First on the tensions. Okay, they read the article on Kosovo, but they didn't read it to the end. There's a few things here. 1, this was stopped because the EU and NATO said they will talk about this, and Kosovo government said, okay, talk about this, we will pause this policy until you resolve this. This gets much more likely if you have a common body regulating this, whose incentive is to negotiate peace, because they are seen as a mediator who has to be neutral. This is like the NATO and EU in this case. Then on ability and incentive. I think that they prove to some extent there's maybe some ability and maybe some incentive, but I'm going to take this down. First of all, most people want to watch the sport. They don't want to go and fight each other. Note, but also, if you want to go fight each other, if you're a hooligan,
You don't want to kill the other hooligan because next time you won't have anyone to fight against. Hooligans necessarily often have rules that you're not allowed to bring certain weapons, that you're not allowed to beat someone up. And thirdly, they often call the ambulance when they're done because they're relying on the other hooligans coming to the next match in order to beat each other up. This is why they have these rules. Note that also, this is like why they say the identification is bad. The link it's bad because it leads to violence. If we break this link or make it very unlikely, they cannot beat us on that. Then also on scale, note that most people will not want to engage in violence. One, because it hurts when you get hurt. Most people have a physical reaction to this. Secondly, you're most likely going to lose if you don't know whether you're bigger than the other, you don't know whether the other person trains, etc. Thirdly, if you go with your family, you're not going to want to engage in violence. Fourthly, we went through a fucking war. We don't want this again. People don't want to engage in violence. They actively look for other people who consent to this violence, say we will meet up in this park, let's meet. They have Facebook groups, etc., WhatsApp chats to do this. Meaning that people who engage in violence, in most cases, they consent to this violence to begin with because they're hooligans. But secondly, the people who go to this, they weigh football so importantly that even though hooligans are separate or there's a chance they might walk through this park, it is worth it for them to have this risk of a bottle being thrown at them because they want to be at that game, they want to see this, they want to actually see their players beat these people, and it's okay, maybe there will be a bottle thrown at me, it's worth the risk. They never explain why they're not able to consent to this risk. Then they tell us that if you have violence, there's no benefits. We actually tell you this is a much better way to let your violence out. It's unclear why this doesn't happen through sport. They just say it's possible. Miri tells you why it's probably likely that you will let these tensions out through sports, especially because you have incentives as a club to mitigate this, because you lose a lot of money if these people stop coming to your games.
When the Serbs lose to the Youngs, you blame them. When they win, you can identify with a team that has a right flag and whose federal police were violent, and you couldn't sanction them in your country.
As a Partizan Belgrade fan, I will prioritize the Partizan Belgrade flag over the Serbian flag every time. Why? Because you often have identity with your club, but even if it's like national, it's one section. You have other people who see now this team as representative, they engage with the community. It's unclear why they will always sit next to a Serb in their bar who waves a Serbian flag at them and makes them angry. I think it's more likely they sit in a bar with other Croats rooting for this team. No, that OG, they tell us football is, they say, it's going to have more money. Note that this depends on how many people buy tickets. Only Miri tells you why more people buy in actually in this, why more people see this as representative, etc. Not all this sponsorship and all that bullshit is actually dependent on viewership. So even if there's more incentive, notice that a small group benefits, and it's unclear why fans will see more tourism as good, or why more fans will see more investment as good. What we tell you is there is a very clear benefit of them feeling happier and them feeling better about themselves because they can root for this team. And note that money only makes you happy if you actually believe that it makes you happy. If I spend money on a ticket and this makes me happy, that's much clearer path than maybe tourism and my government might do something.
I thank the government for that speech. Now I got to please say.
We're good to go? Cool. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 clashes in this debate. The first one is about economics of football, the second one is about the entertainment of football, and the third one, and the least important one, is about national tensions. Before I get into that, 2 points of extreme rebuttal to CG. CG tells, people can just spend money however they want and give money to small teams, and traveling within your city can be as difficult as traveling internationally. We say all of this is at best mitigatory, it's the best case by case. It doesn't engage with all of Tomer's structural reasons as to why these teams make so much more money at present, why it's so important, and why traveling is so difficult for most people. Secondly, again, they didn't engage with the salient points of our case about why small teams rely on big teams to make money, to sustain themselves, and to play football at a professional level. And so They can bet us on that. Secondly, they tell us, oh, representation is cathartic. But we say this is only true if it's positive representation. If I actually feel the people representing me are doing good. If we feel humiliated, if we're upstaged, if our own people go to play for other teams in other leagues and leave us, if my team is not mostly comprised of people from my region or from my country, then I feel miserable and upset, and all of this representation does not stand. Let's go on. Economics, right? Because OG tell us, oh look, we'll have teams that go in teams, and notice mechanically, it's a small number of teams, maybe 2, 3, 4 from each country, going to the big leagues, playing them, making lots of money. And they're saying, oh, they'll have giant audiences and so many people are going to come in. But we think all this analysis, A, is not that comparative, right? Because what they're essentially creating is another Champions League or another UEFA League. They're not creating something that's fundamentally different, and so it's going to look roughly the same as it does, right? There are not going to be that many more benefits for these teams because most of these benefits already exist in status quo. But secondly, as Tomer has shown you, all of the benefits that they do get only come to the very large teams, right? They only come to the teams that end up in these leagues and manage to stay in them long enough to reap the benefits. All the other teams, all small teams in the league, don't get this and are massively hurt, right? OOO does, in this case, you say, oh, people are going to travel less and money isn't that important. What we do in our case is tell you why this case is flipped, right? Why all of these economic points where teams can get much more money and be much more powerful in their own leagues are actually detrimental to the vast majority of fans and vast majority of teams in the league, right? Because Tomer tells you, small teams in status quo all across the world are completely reliant on large teams playing with them. They need these large teams to come in and play in your pitch for the ads around your field to be worth anything. They need it so that fans from other places will come in and buy concessions. They need this because broadcasting rights are shared between the team hosting the match and the team playing against them in the match. And so only when a large team comes in am I able to actually make money. For most small teams, most of their budget comes from 5 or 6 games a year where they play against very large teams and manage to actually reap the benefits of being in this league. Tomer shows you why when they create this new league, why when these avenues of making money no longer exist for the small teams, because they never see the big teams, because they never play against them, they make much less money and are not able to sustain themselves. Right? No, thank you. OG tells, oh, they're gonna share some infrastructure and they're going to be good. But Tomer also attacks that, right? He tells you, look, you can't share a stadium because matches all happen at the same time and the stadium must be local. You can't share training facilities because we use them every day and we can't play on the same pitch all the time. He also tells you that small teams have so many set costs, right? They have to pay for their stadiums, they have to pay for their support crew, they have to pay for their players. And when they take that away, when we can't make enough money for these teams to sustain themselves, at best they have to make massive cuts and be less good and let all of their good players go play in other leagues to make some form of money. Everything all of Gov benches are yet, oh, we'll get local representations because local good players from our teams will live to play abroad for us to make money. At worst, they simply shut down, and so people can't watch sports locally and can't enjoy it as much as they would have. Lastly, OG tell us, oh, anyone can make it to the big league, anyone can rise up and make money from that. We're saying it's simply not comparative, right? And that's also about their case, CG's case, about the Arab sheiks buying teams. Because in actuality, these teams are the best teams, right? It's only Manchester United and Liverpool making it to the Champions League. AFC Wimbledon is never going to make it. Because being a good team, making that much money, playing against the very good teams, the very best teams in these high leagues, means all of the benefits that you once gave to small teams now come from you from even bigger teams. Meaning you have more money and more ability to play and more ability to win on all counts. And so we have shown you why economically this might benefit some teams, but it hurts the vast majority of teams who are much more important for most people. We are over OG because we have shown you that all of their benefits are actually terrible for most people, and above all, because we actually engaged with the case and showed and took OG on their strong side as to why this economic change might actually be important, might actually affect people. Yes, CJ.
Look, you don't prove why we should care about these small teams to the extent that fans don't actually want to watch it. I'm sorry, not everyone can be a football
second clash about entertainment, right? Because if I simply want to watch the best teams in the world, if I want to do what's best, I can watch the Champions League, I can watch the Premier League. There are so many more avenues for good football. Tomer tells you why these specific small teams are so important, why the teams I am a fan of, the teams my grandparents were fans of, the teams I might own if it's a fan club are so important to me, why the vast majority of enjoyment for most people is from their local club, is from coming to watch the game on match day, which he tells you why is only possible for small teams and big teams in our comparatives. And so we think we win this clash as well because it's completely reliant on these small teams existing and actually doing well, because, right? Because unlike what OG says, we actually want our teams to win. We actually want them to play good soccer. You can just say, oh, no one cares because they followed them through relegation. People are still depressed. Lastly, about tensions, right? Because we think this is the least important clash. They tell us, oh, it is irreversible and so is that important. We think that's completely true for our case as well. If a club stops playing football and stops existing, it is terrible. Secondly, they tell you, oh, if only one person gets hurt, it is so horrible. We think they never show us how many people get hurt. It might actually only be one person. Their case is only relevant in the Balkans, not in Benelux, not in Scandinavia, unlike our case. Their case never shows how many people get hurt. And their case is not comparative with all of the security arrangements that government suggests and actually happens in most cases. And so we think, even if they show you there's not more violence, they'll never show you less violence. And so overall this clash is a wash. We can't tell whether there's more violence or less, and it's not that important.
I thank the opposition for that speech. I think all speakers for what was a very fine debate. And I invite the speakers to the floor. Shake hands with the usual.